I have developed in different directions. I haven't always known exactly what I want to do, but who does?
I think there is more possibility and there is more personalisation now of careers. And I think what I mean by that is when we stop looking at careers like a ladder, what you start to see is that up is not the only way. And actually, possibility can be based on a project.
But we did have to make a decision, but are we running to something? Are we brave enough to let go of? Both of us had careers that we'd invested a lot in very big organisations over long periods of time. Neither of us knew very many entrepreneurs.
Welcome back to the second series of Unfiltered. This is the show where we celebrate the imperfect, the unvarnished, and the unashamedly raw journeys that shape our growth. We're bringing you dynamic duos who've propelled each other forward through thick and thin. This series is going to be bigger, bolder, and this time, thanks to our friends at the Marketing Academy, global. Welcome back to another episode of the second series of Unfiltered in partnership with the Marketing Academy. Now, when most of us think of career success, we think about climbing a ladder, one step at a time, one title at a time. But what if we got it all wrong? What if the future of work wasn't about climbing, but was about squiggling? Helen Tupper and Sarah Ellis didn't just question the traditional career path, they've redefined it. As founders of Amazing If and the brains behind the Squiggly Career, they've helped millions of people rethink success, embrace uncertainty, and design careers on their terms. So today, we're going to help rewrite, or attempt to rewrite, I should say, the rulebook on some of the biggest misconceptions we have with our careers. How do we go about staying adaptable in a world that just won't stop changing? What's the real secret behind career happiness? And how do we break free from our long-held beliefs without losing ourselves along the way? Helen, Sarah, thank you so much for joining us on The Growth Distillery. It's a pleasure to have you. I'm really looking forward to this chat.
Thank you for having us.
So let's start at the very beginning. I'd love to know, how did Amazing If and the Squiggly Career come about? How have you guys found each other's orbits?
Yeah, I suppose we found each other before we found Amazing If, it's fair to say. So Helen and I met at university probably around 25 years ago now. We weren't friends immediately. You know, it wasn't that like, oh, we gelled and the chemistry was there from day one. As you'll probably discover as we go through the conversation, Helen is much more extrovert than I am. She's the life and soul of a party. She brings energy to everything she does, which makes me sound dull by contrast. But I'm sort of probably more introverted. We've got also very different interests and kind of hobbies outside of work. But we came together really through, I think, a love of learning. We both like to learn, and also we are both really ambitious. Ambitious for ourselves, ambitious in what we want to achieve and the difference we want to make. And I think towards the end of university, we were sort of helping each other with some kind of assignments. We were working at the same place. We were doing a placement. And we just started to connect and kind of realise that we did have more in common than perhaps you saw on the surface, or perhaps we'd initially seen. And so that was the start of our friendship, which is very different to kind of the start of a business, which I don't think was ever part of the plan. Do you want to pick up from there, Helen?
Yeah, maybe I'll fast forward about 10 years from that kind of moment of kind of forming a friendship to sort of forming a side project. Far before it was a business, it was a side project. So it's about 2013. We were working in the same city for the first time for quite a long time because our careers had taken us into different places. We're both in London. Sarah's working for Sainsbury's. I think you were head of corporate social responsibility at the time. I was working for Virgin, head of marketing. And we had this moment where we were just sort of reflecting on our careers, and we came to this realization that we were really enjoying the work that we were doing and the freedom that we had. And so this freedom to develop in different directions, this freedom to learn new things. And we felt like, even though it wasn't always easy, we were navigating lots of change and uncertainty relatively well. And we were reflecting on how we'd been able to do that, what had meant that we could do that. and also how we could help other people to do it as well. And so this kind of feeling that we were having, Sarah drew it on a piece of, it was actually a napkin. It was honestly, it was so stereotypical, but it was a napkin in a restaurant in Paddington in London. And Sarah said, oh, it's all a bit squiggly, the way that we were looking at our careers. And this, we started to get to, well, what is helping us succeed in this squiggly career? What are the skills that we have developed that is making us feel really good about this sort of changeable and certain career that we're having? And how do we help other people learn these skills? Because we'd been able to access so many different learning programs. You know, we'd put ourselves forward for scholarships. We'd done things like the Marketing Academy. We'd found ourselves coaches and mentors. Like, we were ambitious and proactive, but we recognized that other people might need some more help. And one of the biggest challenges that we were coming across in organizations is a lot of this learning was limited by level. And so we got to this sort of insight that squiggly careers are sort of everybody's reality, but not everybody is accessing the same support that we had been able to. And that just didn't feel right for individuals or organizations. And so at the start, we just said, well, let's help a small group of people and develop these skills and do it together. And that was really all it was in 2013. And I'm sure we'll come on to it, sort of grown and become a lot more since then. But the Squiggly Career started with a conversation in 2013 and a napkin and a pen.
And for those that might not be familiar with this Squiggly Career as to where it is now, where are we now?
So I suppose when we first started talking about the Squiggly Career, we actually found that it clicked and connected with individuals straight away. We were running very informal workshops in an evening, and we were drawing a diagram. So we were showing, careers used to look like ladders. They were very staircase-like. We draw the squiggle and everyone would just nod. And we were like, oh, okay. Everybody got it straight away. It either gave people a name for something they'd already experienced, but didn't sort of know how to say it with confidence and with clarity. And perhaps until that point had been even a bit apologetic about it. Oh, I have developed in different directions. I haven't always known exactly what I want to do. Like, who does? And for other people, I think it was sharing what they were feeling in organisations. There was a lot more change and a lot more uncertainty. So what people then really liked was the practical skills. So we were giving people practical skills. How do you figure out what feels motivating for you at work? How do you make sure that your confidence gremlins, those beliefs that we all have that get in our way, don't hold you back in your career? So actually for individuals, we found Squiggly Career straight away stuck. We started doing these workshops. We started doing a podcast way before everybody listened to lots of podcasts. I think about 4 people probably listened to our podcast when we got started. And one of those people was my mum. And so that was brilliant. And it sort of grew very organically and kind of very much word of mouth and by recommendation. I don't think at that point, Helen and I had ever intended again for it to be a business. It was just something we enjoyed and we got a lot of satisfaction from. And actually, what then happened is it was those individuals that took us into organisations, not us. So people have always been brilliant supporters and sponsors of Squiggly Careers. That's definitely something that has helped us to grow. So those people would go back to whoever they worked for. Lots of people sometimes in some of those marketing academy companies. And then they'd say, oh, we should get Helen and Sarah to come and run something on Squiggly Careers and on these skills in our company. Then the challenge was, well, we've got jobs, we've got day jobs. So there was genuinely a kind of period of time where Helen and I used to take holiday from our day jobs to then go and do another job, which was helping people in organisations with learning programs, development programs around these skills. And then at that point, it started to get kind of bigger. Also, at some point, it got a bit unrealistic. At some point, we were like, we'd like to go on a holiday that isn't a working holiday.
And we had children as well. So when we first started, we didn't have children. So there was a point at which Sarah was managing director of a creative agency. I was marketing director at Microsoft. I'd got 2 children. Sarah had 1. We were writing a book, running a business and doing our job. I mean, it got quite, there was a point at which we were like, do you know what? We need to make a decision and try to grow this beyond this side project into a successful business. And so I left Microsoft 2018. I think Sarah left her role 2019 probably. And then maybe we'll come on to it, bar a pretty tricky moment when the pandemic challenged us on our business model of in-person training when that wasn't possible for a while. Bar kind of navigating that moment, we've continued to grow since then. So now our business looks like training about 100,000 people a year in some of the largest organizations in the world. And we also try to put as much support out for everybody who's not in those organizations, whether that's, you know, our Writing for Harvard Business Review, the podcast, and all the tools that we create, the community learning experiences we create. We are just on a mission now to make Squiggly Careers better for everybody in as many organizations with as many people as we can.
We will get on to all of the above, but what I'd love to understand is, what are the signals of a squiggly career? So what am I feeling and what am I seeing in myself, in my context, that give me an indication that, in fact, I might not be following that sort of archetypal climb of the ladder?
I think it's often that more than one thing is happening at once, because I think everybody's reality now is that we're all in squiggly careers, because most organisations are full of change and uncertainty. Most organisations are getting flatter, not adding in more hierarchy. Hierarchy is about 100 years old, so that's not the way organisations are going. But individually, I think often what people see is, you know, they want to develop in maybe different directions. So we sometimes call it a squiggle and stay. So I did this in Sainsbury's. I was working in marketing, and then I went to work in corporate responsibility, and I'd got no expertise in that area. So I sort of transferred my talents. I took how I did my job rather than what I did with me. And so I think we're seeing a lot more of that. So people kind of squiggle and stay and kind of developing in different directions. I think often people are navigating at the same time opportunities and obstacles. So we always say, well, in a squiggly career, like in any career, there's no such thing as a straight line to success. We all have those knotty moments, restructures, redundancies, leaders changing, things that we can't control. And also at the same time, there are often usually opportunities as well. So it's kind of like you've got opportunities and obstacles. You're thinking about the possibilities, but there's often also problems at the same time.
Yeah.
We sometimes describe it as a bit of and agility. It's not going, my career is feeling either brilliant or, it's a disaster. It's often when you talk to people now about how does their career feel, they're like, it's really energizing, or I'm excited, I'm learning lots. And at times that can feel quite overwhelming. So I think there's more ands for us to grapple with in our squiggly careers than there perhaps was when everything was linear. Our development was dependent on our managers or our organizations, and we were told what to do and where to go. We sort of had this waiting mindset, whereas now I think we have to have this creating mindset, and I think that feels quite different for people.
I love what you've touched on there, because I think this is something that, you know, often we get thrown these sort of generational divides that in fact are actually much more fluid than the labels would suggest. Do you think that the need to create and to become the master of our own destiny is more prevalent than it was because these pathways are less linear, they're less apparent, less sort of well-trodden?
I think there is more possibility and there is more personalization now of careers. And I think what I mean by that is, when we stop looking at careers like a ladder, what you start to see is that up is not the only way. And actually, possibility can be based on a project. So there's more project-based work, for example, where we're matching kind of talents to projects rather than just you've done this job title, therefore that's the next thing you can do. There's much more kind of agility in work for people to work on projects. I also think when we're looking at things like secondments or sort of even things like sort of short-term placements in organizations, there are more opportunities to move around a business now. So I think that's the first thing. If you kind of look at careers like ladders, you just look to promotion as a way of develop. I think in the world that we are working in today, where there's a lot more fluidity, I think there's more possibility like beyond promotion. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the personalization. What we have noticed, even in the time that we have been working on Squiggly, is that squiggly careers have now they're becoming more something that people are proud to talk about. So 10 years ago, you know, when Sarah was saying that people almost kind of felt embarrassed around having moved around a business and they didn't have a way to say it with pride. And now Squiggly has given people a language of pride. Like, people have told us they take our book into a job interview and say, I've had a career like this, like as like a badge of pride. We saw it on the weekend. I saw someone post about a video about their squiggly career on LinkedIn. And so the reason I say that is because I think there is now more pride in personalization. So actually, career conformity now looks like, oh, you've done the same thing that everyone else has. But now, if you've got a squiggly career, it's much more personalized, it's much more individualized, and there's more of a story to tell. And I think that individuals want that, and also like employers want that. Like, what's your story? What have you done? Tell us about the difference that you've made, not just about your job title. So I think there's those two things, that there is more possibility and there is more personalization. I think Squiggly kind of feels like a bit of a sweet spot in the middle of that. But I think that's what's unlocked this a lot more for people.
Yeah, and I think giving something a label and giving a language or a shared language is such a powerful driver. To your point, it kind of brings it out of the shadows. I'm not discussing my career as a counterpoint to the convention. It's actually something over here that is just as dynamic, just as vibrant, just not what you thought traditionally was the trodden path. I would love to know, like, where was your Squiggle as a duo, right? Was there a squiggly time that you guys really grew in developing what is the Squiggly Career?
Oh, that's a good question. It's a good question. I think we definitely learnt by doing. And that's advice I give to anybody who is thinking about starting up their own company. We definitely didn't, I love strategy and I'm naturally very strategic, but we didn't strategize our way to Squiggly. We shared ideas that we'd got, we saw what stuck, and then we sort of did that sensible thing of we gravitated towards those ideas that seem to be really useful for people, and useful is our number one value. And then we let go of the things where we were like, oh, that's not as helpful, or that doesn't seem to have kind of struck a chord with people. I think our most squiggly time was where actually we were both still working full time and we were developing all of these ideas really fast, and we'd got the capacity at that time. This is just before either of us had kids. I do think kids added a different level of squiggliness, but kind of pre-kids, we'd started this podcast, we were doing these workshops, we started to talk on some stages, we got our first book deal, I think just before Helen had her first baby, just about squeeze that in there. And we were just experimenting, we were really finding our flow. It was very low pressure. So it's very different to now when you run a company and you employ people and you feel very responsible for those people. And at that point, we were just sort of having fun. And we get on well all the time, but in a work context, we still say now our most meaningful and memorable moments are always sort of us together, developing, building on each other's ideas, having some of these really kind of unique experiences. Some of them are kind of quite random. We can share some of them if it's some of them are really weird. But where you find yourself doing things that you just never imagined, like you do find yourself recording an advert for LinkedIn, and you think, what's happened? How are we doing this? We're used to, as marketeers, being kind of behind the camera, not in front of the camera. And so I think that was our squiggliest moment, where we were just sort of learning loads, being really playful, trying stuff out, being curious, being experimenting. I think we had a sort of 2-year window where we just sort of saw where our squiggle took us. And then we had a real inflection point where we had to make a decision. Were we going to just keep doing what we were doing? Which there was lots of reasons to keep doing that because it was fun, but we'd also got other jobs that we enjoyed. We never didn't enjoy our other roles. So we were never kind of running away from something, but we did have to make a decision. But are we running to something? Are we brave enough to let go of? Both of us had careers that we'd invested a lot in very big organisations over long periods of time. Neither of us knew very many entrepreneurs or people who run their own companies. All of our networks were kind of in big brands. And it felt like a really big risk for both of our careers to then say, oh, let's go and run this company together. And we'd got no idea and no confidence about whether that was actually something we could do. So that there was sort of this squiggly fun moment, and I think there was like a squiggly serious moment.
Before we move on, I want to know what's your favorite, what's the archetypal out of body moment that you wanted to talk to a minute ago? That was that pinch yourself, I can't believe we're doing this.
I think I'll do mine. I think it was doing our TEDx talk.
Yeah.
Because like there have been so many of these moments where we're just like, this is weird. The reason that was particularly weird was because it was in the pandemic. So I think we'd wanted to do a TEDx talk for ages. Where we had this like wish list of things that that we wanted
The
to
red
do.
dot, yeah.
Yeah, it'd been on the list. It'd been on the list. And we'd waited because we thought we want to do the London one. We really want to do, the biggest one in the UK. We want to do the London one. And we'd worked really hard to build a relationship with a team so that we were kind of credible as people, all this kind of stuff. And the moment came for us to do our talk. Except so did the pandemic. And practicing that talk, I mean, even the run up to it. So we had to, practice it all remotely over Zoom. This big moment for us that we'd expected it to be one way, and in reality, it was us practicing it over Zoom. And then there was a day that we were allowed to practice together with social distancing. So we went to a random park in the rain and we practiced sort of a couple of meters away from each other with a camera looking at us and a random dog just going around us while we were practicing this massively important presentation. And then the day came, Abbey Road Studios, our big day, except no one was in the studio. There was no audience. There was just me and Sarah and a perspex screen between us because we weren't allowed to be together. Preceded by one of those tests that you had to do to check.
Yeah. A brain tickle.
Yeah, a little brain tickle, a nice relaxing brain tickle before this big presentation. And so it was just really, really surreal. And I look back, I mean, our TED Talk has done, they put it on the homepage of TED.com. So it's done well.
Yeah, millions. Yeah, we looked at it.
Yeah, I look at it. If you look really carefully, you might not have seen it, but there is a perspex screen between us that most people miss because they're not looking for it. But I look back at that time and I just think it's just one of those, like, there are lots of funny moments and memories for us in the midst of running this growing business, and I really look back on them with quite a lot of like pride and happiness to have those moments, as weird as they are.
Going from, I think, what would have been one of those pinch yourself highs to as you pointed out, a serious squiggle. I can assume that the pandemic would have been not just one step forward but maybe a few steps back, right? And I'd love to understand how, as founders, you pivoted to get through what would have been a very, very challenging time for a business predicated on face-to-face engagement.
Yeah, I mean, it was not fun, I think is the first thing to say. It was really, really hard. And I think it tested us in all sorts of ways because as well as doing face-to-face training, we'd also built our business based on Helen and I being in rooms together, putting Post-its up, kind of creating together. And suddenly, we didn't see each other for a really long time. And we'd both got small kids by this point. So you'd got nurseries closing. I moved back in with my parents to get childcare. So that's interesting. If you've not lived with your parents since you're 18 and your partner's coming with you. And so you've got so much stuff to grapple with. It felt really overwhelming. I think what I always feel most grateful for during that time from kind of a business perspective is we had one client, and I'm going to give them a shout out, Diageo. So we worked with Diageo already, and they were naturally already very global in mindset and good at using tech. And so actually they didn't pause the learning program that they were already doing with us. And we actually did already use quite a lot of tech. So we live draw all of our learning. We never use slides. We were always pretty comfortable using tech. Like Helen's great actually at building tech, and we like to play with tech. And so while loads of other businesses paused for very good reason, while they sort of had to rewire themselves for what was happening, Diageo kept going. And they were a great group who loved to learn. And actually, some of them have been through the Marketing Academy and they've all gone on to do really brilliant things. And so that just helped us, just to have a bit of confidence of like, at least we've got this one thing. So that felt useful. We also then tried to think about, well, what could we do now that we couldn't normally do? So kind of you tried to use that question. And then we did some very specific podcasts with people who we thought would normally say no to us, but suddenly had time. So just, people who ran companies. That's actually the first time I managed to speak to Amy Edmondson, who's a professor over at Harvard, who's actually been on the podcast twice now. A guy called Rich, who I'd known a while, but he's one of the co-founders of a company called Headspace, kind of mindfulness app. And so we reached out to all these people where we felt like probably their day jobs were a bit different. and maybe they could say yes to us in an easier way than they might have been able to do before. And so I think that gave us a real sense of purpose, because we could put those episodes out. We were getting really good feedback from people like, you're making me feel less alone. I think we were making ourselves feel less alone. And we'd got enough cash flow to keep us going for a bit. So in that kind of early period, I think the things I always felt grateful for was that we had got cash flow. So we weren't kind of living month to month, because that would have made it so much more stressful. The support that we'd got around us, like, hi mum, I'm moving back home, and people just going, okay. So that my partner could keep working, I could keep working, and my mum and dad could look after my 3-year-old, was certainly kind of that reality. He was having a great time in the garden. And that I think throughout it all, we just kept saying yes to things that we felt were the right thing to do, that often we weren't earning any money from, but that was keeping Squiggly's profile high. We were staying relevant. It for lots of people, it was a bit of a squiggly moment. It was a moment where people did reflect on their careers and what they wanted to do. So we sort of stayed present. We sort of hung in there, even though there were days and there were times where you were just like, how is this going to work? What is going to happen? And then I think we could do a more sort of significant pivot after about 3 months. But I think that's how we sort of survived that first 100 days.
What an amazing reframe. I think just the awareness to pause and go, how do we look outward to understand who else is going through a bit of a squiggle, and how can we capitalize on what is going to be a once in a lifetime opportunity to get exposure where we might not on every other day of the week. I think that is what a brilliant sliding doors moment. And I think it shows the incredible power of framing. I want to ask, I want to shift gears a bit, because I think we have an opportunity to tap into the collective wisdom of the two of you. Beyond, what does the fuel mix look like to set us up? If I'm someone and I'm staring down the barrel of a squiggly career and I've gone, you know what, that's where I'm at. I'm not going to fit this functional structure. I'm not going to, walk along the path well trodden. What can I do to set myself up for success, or to set myself up for agility in a way that sets me up for success in a squiggly career?
I think the first thing that people need to think about, I kind of think the two of the kind of core skills of succeeding in a squiggly career are, before you go and explore opportunities, because opportunities are exciting, right? They're shiny. I could do this, I could do that, I could write a book, I could do a podcast, they're all nice shiny things, but they might not really be a good fit for you. And I think the way to work out what's likely to be a good fit for you is to think about your values and your strengths. So start with awareness before you kind of leap into action. Otherwise the risk is you're bouncing around from role and role trying to work it out as you go. So values are about understanding what motivates and drives you. We all have those, and they're pretty stable. So my values in running Amazing If are the same values I had when I was working at Microsoft. The things that mattered to me are consistent. And then strengths are actually a little bit more variable. So strengths are the things that give you energy that you want to be known for, and that can change. So if I talk about sort of Microsoft versus Amazing If, what I wanted to be known for at Microsoft was definitely, I wanted to be known for sort of growing my team and growing the business, and I wanted to be known for my leadership skills. But I think now that I work in Amazing If, I much more want to be known for career development. I much more want to be known for making it happen. The growth thing is actually still the same. I want to be known for growing our business and growing people. That's consistent. But that is a choice. Your strengths are a choice. And I think once you've done a little bit of reflection on what motivates and drives you, your values, and what gives you energy and you want to be known for, your strengths, you can then use that to almost create a bit of a filter and a fit for your future. So I could look at 5 different roles, some that are in my organization, some that are outside of my organization, and I could run those roles through that filter, so I could see which one of these positions is more likely to align with my values and my strengths. And it's not a perfect science. Like, it doesn't mean you're going to go into it and it's every day is amazing, but it does mean that when you're having conversations, you can be a little bit more informed in those discussions. So I can talk about, these are some of the things I want to be known for. I'd love to talk about, how much of this role requires those things. So you can be a bit more in control, a little bit more informed, and a bit more confident in the conversations. And one of the things that we really advocate for is to have curious career conversations. So if you're somebody now who's thinking, you know what, I feel a bit constrained, I feel like I want to do something different, I'm not quite sure what that different is, I would take that awareness of the values and strengths and I would go and have some curious career conversations. These are not about applying for loads of jobs. They are not about, specifically asking for something. It is about me going, tell me more about what you do in a day. Tell me more about the opportunities that you have to learn in your role. And when the more curious conversations that you have, the more connections you create, which are always good for your career because that's where most of the opportunities lie in connections. And also the more people are likely to sort of help match you. Oh, okay. So if that's what you're interested in, one of the things that you might want to have a look at is this. And that don't wait, back to Sarah's point, don't wait for the perfect job to be advertised. Go and have curious conversations, take that awareness into them. And often that will open doors that you just can't see for yourself yet. That's what we're trying to do really, is just because of the ladder-like way of looking at people's careers, people often get stuck in silos with their skills. Like, I can only be what I can see. And what we're saying is actually there's like a world of opportunity there. You just might need some help to open those different doors for your development. And curious conversations are they're the way into opening different doors for your development.
Sarah, what isn't in that fuel mix?
Focusing too much on what you've not got and your weaknesses. I am definitely someone who early in my career got this wrong. So I spent quite a lot of time trying to be equally good at absolutely everything, which nobody wins, basically. You just kind of get worse, or you sort of nudge yourself up, but you don't really stand out. Certainly not in the same way as if you kind of over invest in the strengths, in those things that give you energy. And I think sometimes it's easy to be our own worst critics. So you work with someone and you think, and this happened to me all the time because I worked with some brilliant people, and I'd work with them and be like, oh, they're amazing at this. And I would be self-aware enough to know, and I'm not. And so then I'd be like, okay, so I've got to be more like them if I want to get better. Because I'm ambitious, achievement is one of my values. And so then you sort of end up being a kind of jack of all trades, but in a unhelpful way for your squiggly career. Because you're like, oh, I'm trying to be more like Helen, I'm trying to be more like Tom, and I need to work on the gaps that I've got and the weaknesses. Oh, and I'm on my own worst critic. So, and I'm naturally actually quite critical. I've got a kind of critical thinking brain. And so all this time you sort of feel like all of these things, you're just sort of never good enough. Whereas actually, I think when you talked about kind of reframing, when you start from yourself, it's a much, much better place to start, and you've got much more capacity to grow, building on those things that you are already good at than your weaknesses anyway. And this was transformational for me. I actually did need two things here though that helped me. I needed a strength spotter. So this was working for a really good leader, a lady called Sarah Bennison, marketeer, brilliant marketeer, who spotted my strengths in me almost before I could see them for myself. And, was sort of really explicit in saying to me, like, this is where you really add value, Sarah. Is this something you enjoy? Because you're good at ideas, you're good at starting from scratch. To be honest, I was often quite good in left field roles, weird and wonderful roles that people had not done before, often really suited me. And she sort of helped me with that clarity. And then I felt more confident about that. The other thing, so I was kind of needing that strength spotter. My favourite definition of leadership is be yourself more with skill. That comes from Rob Joffe and Gareth Jones, and their book, Why Should Anyone Be Led by You? And you can read their Harvard Business Review article with the same title for free. So I'd really encourage your listeners to have a read of that. Though it is quite old now, like it's been around for a long time, every time I read it, it feels as relevant as ever. Like, be yourself, but don't just sort of hope for the best. The more with skill means you've got to create. You've got to continually improve. You've got to continually learn. And I think fundamentally that's what we see. When people enjoy their squiggly careers, they are learning all the time and every day. The World Economic Forum have this great phrase where they say, we used to go to work to learn to do a job, and now learning is the job. And it's those people who get that you are unlearning and relearning all of the time, that we're always developing, we're always a work in progress. They're the people who succeed in their squiggly careers. It's the people who think they are finished or fixed or worry about their weaknesses or their own worst critics. They're the people who stall or get stuck.
I just want to double click on one thing that you mentioned earlier. You mentioned an unhealthy jack of all trades but master of none. What's the difference between a healthy generalist versus an unhelpful or an unhealthy generalist skill set?
Yeah. So I think this was me, so I can talk about this. Though actually I think I've changed. So I don't think there's any right or wrong around specialist versus generalist. I think you make a choice depending on what you enjoy the most, and both can be really rewarding for your squiggly career. But I think I started my career as a sort of more unhelpful generalist, where to Helen's description earlier, I was sort of moving around a bit, usually within an organisation, but perhaps not being really intentional about moving around, wasn't really thinking about my strengths. I was probably just quite attracted by whatever felt new and interesting at the time. I probably got bored quite quickly. And that meant I definitely left some learning behind. I didn't stay in roles for long enough. I definitely made some wrong choices, which we all make in our squiggly career. So we shouldn't kind of beat ourselves up too much. But a lot of those wrong choices were where I was like, oh yeah, I'll sort of go and do this for a bit. And actually it was a really bad fit for me and for my skills and for my strengths. I then think kind of in the second 10 years of my corporate career, I then became a really healthy generalist and sort of jack of all trades. And so I did some very different jobs, but the red thread that went through all of those jobs started to get much, much more consistent. So I did 3 or 4 jobs in a row where the job was created. So no one had done it before me. That was always a good clue for me, a good signal. I'm probably going to enjoy this because there's lots of space and ambiguity, and I like those things. I did jobs that had lots of kind of ability to have ideas, to start things from scratch, to develop new projects. I liked leading teams. I was good at developing people, and I really kind of cared about my career development, but also other people's, which is probably not a surprise given what we do today. Yeah. And so those things, it almost didn't matter still where I worked. So when I was in Sainsbury's, I did go from marketing to corporate responsibility, and I enjoyed both of those areas as much as each other because I was a very happy generalist. I was interested in loads of things, but actually the kind of skills that I was using, the strengths that I was using, the values that I had were very consistent. And that wasn't true in the first part of my career. Now, I do think, slight caveat, if you are listening to this and earlier in your career, I think particularly when you're early on, you do a lot of experimenting because you have to experiment to learn these things about yourself. No one gets it right every time. No one gets it right first time. And also you make some mistakes later in your career too. It's not like you suddenly crack this and then everything's smooth sailing. But I think I definitely did have this kind of transition from not being thoughtful enough to actually being much more intentional about the choices I was making.
You both seem to have this incredible growth mindset that's really at the fore of what you do. Is that a muscle that you cultivate over time? Because to be able to fail forward in a way that you're garnering learning from every interaction, I think doesn't necessarily come easy to everybody. And I think for those, that might be listening or watching that want to land in that mental model that you've just articulated, what would be your advice to them?
I think Sarah and I both have a learning bias in our brain. I think it is to the point of what made us sort of friends in the first place. I think that was part of it. So whilst we do have that, I think my advice to other people is that your ability to learn and to be curious and have this sort of open growth mindset is heavily influenced by who you spend time with. So obviously I've not always worked with Sarah. I have worked in some teams and organizations that didn't feel like our company Amazing If does, that were a lot more fixed and where the environment was a lot more hierarchical and where there wasn't really a culture of learning. And I think, other people might find themselves working in those teams, and that's hard. If you're going into those teams and you're the person who loves learning and wants to be open and, wants to be kind of curious about how to make things happen, and everyone else is saying, well, but follow the process and do it the way we've always done it and stay in your box. It is hard, but that is where I think what helps is who you connect with outside of that team, because your mindset is what will help you to stay relevant in your role and resilient in your career. Like, do not compromise your curiosity and your learning is the thing that will make the biggest difference to your development over the long term. And so you might not be able to change that team, your manager, the culture, you might not be able to do that. And I've tried in many places, really tiring to be that person trying to change a company. But what you can do is spend time with people perhaps outside of that environment who act as a source of connection. And so that's what Sarah and I did for years. You know, not every company I worked in was closed and fixed, but some teams and managers were. But I always had a connection with Sarah. We would always talk about learning. I always spent time in communities where other people had a similar mindset, things like the Marketing Academy or you know, courses that I was doing. And I think it is really, really important that you kind of protect and nurture a growth mindset, a learning, like this learning agility, even when it feels compromised or constrained in your work environment. And that would just be my advice for everybody. I think it makes such a difference to your development, and you don't want to be limited if the team that you're in is not sort of supportive of that at the moment. Like, spend time with people in an organization, like, you know, create networks. I've done that before as well. I've sort of created internal networks and outside of an organization, because the role that you're in today and the team that you're working in today, that is not going to be forever. It won't be forever. But I think so that it doesn't have a damaging impact on your development, it is important that you take control with who you spend time with outside of that team.
That's such brilliant advice. You know, too often we're self-limiting in the aperture in which we look at who we can draw on from a growth mindset perspective. I want to focus on the leader and the role that the leader plays in this, because let's say I've got a large team in a big organization, and I'm fundamentally picking up what you're putting down, and I want to support all of the squiggly careers that are within my duty of care. What can I do as a leader to set my team up to create hallmarks for supporting this sort of career pathway, or lack thereof?
Well, the first thing I'd say is that we know from all the work that we do, role modeling matters. So if you want to create a learning culture in your team, you need to be learning.
You gotta walk the talk
and
on
not
it.
just learning, but also sharing with your team what you're learning. And that sounds like a small thing, but actually it's really easy for leaders to sometimes think, well, maybe I don't need to learn anymore because I'm already at this level. That's sort of our ego talking a little bit. Or more practically, and probably more commonly, leaders and managers are incredibly busy. They've got lots of demands on their day to day, and finding time to learn can feel really challenging. Now, we always kind of challenge that as a kind of constraint to learning, this idea of kind of time, because one of the things that we are really interested in, and we've been doing a lot of work on for our next book, is how do you add learning into what you already do? So actually, as a leader, one of the things that I would be looking at is the meetings and moments that already happen in your team in a week, career conversations, one-to-ones, team meetings, away days. How could you increase how much you're all learning in those moments? How intentional are you about using those moments where you're already together so that everybody is learning? Just to give you a couple of examples of things that we do. So we do borrowed brilliance. So this is the idea of escaping your silo and borrowing brilliance from other people and places. So whether that's a Teams channel or whether that's an agenda item, we actually find that one works particularly well when we're together and getting everyone to talk about, so what's your borrowed brilliance? And it can be absolutely anything. I talked about the Jerry Springer documentary that I watched on Netflix, which was not my usual viewing, but do you know what? If you want to look at how do you borrow brilliance from a different industry to completely transform how something is created, it's fascinating. So, but when am I ever going to talk about that in my workday? Never. But by putting it on an agenda suddenly and giving it 2 to 3 minutes, these are not kind of big significant things. They don't take up loads of time. So that's one way that we kind of make sure that learning is kind of part of our agenda. We have mistake moments. So everyone makes mistakes, but what we know is that in high trust teams and high performing teams, people talk about those mistakes. They share them so that everybody can learn. And so we literally have a Teams channel for all of our company called Mistake Moments. And every mistake we make gets shared with everyone. And everybody does this. And so, and again, that sounds like a big thing, but actually it's a really quick task. you share that day. Today I had a mistake moment when I sent the wrong document out to a client. What did you learn? That's the important bit. And what's the action for next time? And actually, by sharing our mistake moments, you give yourself permission to kind of learn as you go from those things that go wrong, which is important. But also, we all learn together. Everyone's very supportive. We all get that we make mistakes. And you take away some of those fears that we have around, oh, I got that wrong, but I couldn't possibly ask for help. Or I wouldn't want to share that with Sarah and Helen because what might they be thinking? So back to role modelling, when we first started doing that, obviously it was even more important that Helen and I shared our mistake moments, because you do have to recognise that when you're in kind of positions of power, whatever that looks like in your company, people look up to you. And what you do is always way, way more important than anything you say. So your actions are what people will look to for the cues and the signals of, well, what does it mean to learn in this team? What are the questions I'm being asked in a career conversation? Am I asking Helen about what her next step is? Ladder-like language. Helen feels pressured to be like, oh, does that mean I have to say a step up? Even when actually what I might like to do is move sideways, or I might want to stay and grow in my role. Versus if I say to Helen, what's feeling motivating for you in your role at the moment? Very different questions, a really simple swap that you can make. But suddenly I'm giving Helen loads more space and permission to really share with me personally, like, what does she want to do in her career? Where does she want to go? And I'm sort of taking away assumptions, and I'm kind of taking away that ladder for her. So quite a few ideas there for your leaders who are listening.
Helen, what would you add?
I think one of the things that I see, and we see this in like a disconnect in surveys. So where, you say, you get some feedback back and it says 22% of people think they are learning in their role at the moment. And managers go, well, no, everybody in my team is learning. I've talked about it with everybody. And you're like, what's going on here? Like, managers think learning's happened and people like don't think learning's happening. What's going on? And I think it's back to the point about labels and language. So I think one of the reasons people can see learning happens in Amazing If is we've given a lot of stuff a language. We've got our mistake moments. We've got our walk and talks. We've got so much language going on that people cannot miss the learning. We call it learning moments. Like, let's put a learning moment in a meeting. And so I think one of the first things that I would do if I was sort of really wanting to invest in this as a leader is I would ask my team, what does learning look like at the moment? And I would not try to drive that conversation. I would just be like, what does learning look like at the moment? And if what I get back is, oh, well, we have that annual learning day where we go on, don't we, in December that day, and we can have a budget to go on a course. I'd be thinking, this is problematic because all that other learning it's not in people's head. Like, feedback is one of those powerful ways that people will learn. And if people are not recognizing that, I've got a problem in how I'm positioning learning in my team. And so what I would then do, having had that a very open, what does learning look like, I would do what Sarah was talking about. What learning would we like to add in? So here are 10 ideas for learning that we could add in as a team. So we could have we could do some peer feedback, we could do some skill swaps, all these things that we brand and we've written about and we can send to people if it's helpful. But I would let the team choose, what learning do we want to add in over the next quarter? Let's pick 3 different learning ideas that we want to add into our meetings. And I would give the team some choice and control over that rather than the manager deciding what learning has to look like. Because I think when it's seen as a collective effort to get better together, you've got way more buy-in, and when it's got labels, people know that it's happening. And so that would be the only thing that I would add to what kind of Sarah said about how to create shared ownership of what learning looks like in a team.
One of the things we often say to managers and leaders when we're talking about how do you create a learning culture is involve, don't solve. Because actually our observation is managers and leaders do want to do this. I would say the vast majority of managers really care about people's learning and development, and often they're really motivated by it. That's why they wanted to go into those roles. Yeah. But then everything else has got in the way and it's hard to make happen. But if you kind of go, but as a leader and a manager, it's not your job to solve all of this. It's your job to ask them the questions that Helen just shared and kind of create an environment for that conversation. And all of those things that Helen and I just talked about, we review those with the team, and even the other week we did a keep or kill. So of the learning moments that we've added in, which ones are working? Everybody gave them a usefulness score out of 10. And we're sort of, Helen and I are involved in that, but we're just sort of one small piece of the puzzle.
Yep.
So we're giving a usefulness score, and then we are going, well, what makes it useful? What actually makes it unhelpful? And there were 2 or 3 things that we were like, well, we need to ditch these because they're not working. People are not learning from them. And, you know, when they start to feel like a chore, the last thing you're then doing is learning. So you're like, well, get rid of that. We need something even better. So we often use what's working well, even better if, as a bit of a feedback frame for continual improvement.
Oh, I like even better if. I mean, that is a phenomenal pantry of ingredients that you've given. I feel as though I could chew your ears off in terms of questions and poking and prodding, but I want to be respectful of your time. So we've got a tradition to end the episodes on this series, the 3 big questions plus one. So I'm going to start with you, Helen, and we'll alternate. So Sarah, don't worry, you get the inside lane on the next one. Helen, what is the single most important question we should be asking ourselves?
What do I want to be known for? I think it's that strengths question. I think once you answer, what do I want to be known for, you are immediately in a position of greater control over your career. And rather than expecting other people to answer that for you, or just sort of moving around with like a lack of intention, I think that is the answer to that question is one of the best, I think, drivers of a career that's going to help you to be at your best and help you to do work that you actually enjoy.
Sarah, what's the most important question we should be asking ourselves?
How can I be useful in the jobs that I do? And I've stolen that from Jack Graham, who is a sort of social entrepreneur. He's worth a follow on LinkedIn. And he created something called Year Here. And, you know, when everybody was talking about do jobs that you love, which I was never quite sure about, it always felt a bit cliche, and it felt a bit, I think for a lot of people, actually, it's really demotivating, you know, just sort of do what you love and it'll all be fine. I prefer the pragmatism and also the kind of the usefulness that comes with, well, how can I be useful? How can I be helpful for other people? We are all hardwired to want to help people. We know that because scientists even call it the helper's high. So the more useful we're being, the more helpful we're being in our careers, I think often the more motivated we are.
I might stay with you. What's the most important thing to let go of?
Ladder-like thinking. Titles, promotion, destinations, steps, those words and that thinking will hold you back. And alongside that, it often feeds both our fears and our egos at kind of a deeper level. And I don't think you let go of it all at once. I think that's a really hard ask for anyone. But I think you let go of it in increments and sort of recognizing, am I doing this for the right reasons, for like the right reasons for me? Or am I doing this because of those other things, status, shiny objects? Those things tarnish very quickly. It's not easy to kind of unlearn and relearn, but if you can let go of the kind of ladder framing your career, like that's what success looks like, I think you will set yourself up for a much more fulfilling time at work.
Helen, what's the most important thing to let go of?
I think the most important thing to let go of is the idea of career conformity and the risk of career comparison. So career conformity, I feel like I have to do everything that everyone else is doing, and career comparison, I don't feel as good as you because I'm not doing what you are doing. I think those people, those ideas limit people in lots of ways. And I think what we're trying to replace that with when we talk about squiggly careers is a bit more control. So instead of kind of conformity, control over what you want to do and where you want to go, and a lot less comparison. So I have a quote about kind of running your own race. And I think the more we run our own race at our own speed, in our own way, the less we limit ourselves based on fears about what other people think and what other people are doing.
Helen, what's a life well lived?
Oh, I think a life well lived is one where you like who you're working with and you're always learning. I think we spend a lot of time at work. In our waking hours, it's the thing we do most in our life. And I think loving what you're doing every day is probably unrealistic, but I think aiming to like what we're doing and who we're doing it with feels a bit more attainable. And if you are learning, you are always growing and you are far less likely to get left behind. So all these worries about AI taking our jobs and what's the future, if you are learning, then you are far less likely to get left behind and you have a lot less to fear from any changes that are coming.
Sarah, what is a life well lived?
For me, I think it means never living the same year twice. And that doesn't mean doing loads of different jobs or always changing everything up. But I think it means always being a work in progress, never stalling, and making the most of all the opportunities there are to learn and grow every day, all of the time, and to keep experimenting. I sort of have that mantra, even though, on the surface things might look the same. I think always kind of feeling like you are fueling your growth is just how you'll feel like you are fulfilled and satisfied. And also very practically, you get to a Friday and you do feel like, oh, I'm that bit further forward than I was at the start of the week.
Forward centre of mass.
Mm-hmm.
All right, +1. Sarah, what was the one question I should have asked you both but didn't?
What's your biggest mistake moment?
What's your biggest mistake moment?
It's a good question that I've asked myself. We've had mistake moments where we have sometimes written things for books that we've done, and then they've been completely wrong. And it's quite a tricky one. The sunk costs when you're writing a book are really high. And probably our mistake moment was beating ourselves up too much about that in the early days of writing. So, sometimes you write chapters or have ideas and you do loads of work, and then you realise that that's not right. And initially it's kind of soul destroying and you're like, oh, crikey. But then I think what we have learned from that mistake moment is to trust the process. So actually for our most recent book, that has happened again. I think it happens every time you write a book. But I think we are much more trusting of the process now, and then much more likely to fix friction fast because of it. So probably in the second book that we wrote, which was during the pandemic, we had more friction, more times where we kind of get annoyed with each other or couldn't find our way through things, or there felt like there was loads of sunk costs. And I think when we've kind of learned from that, and I think writing the latest one, which has still been hard, we have been much better at trusting the process, at kind of finding our way through it. But I think we had some good mistake moments along the way that have led us to trusting the process.
I appreciate you answering the +1. You didn't need to. Helen, what was the one question I should have asked you both but didn't?
What do co-founders do when there is conflict between them and how they do it?
Well, I won't get you to answer that because I will respect the fact that it was the question that I didn't ask. It also gives me an excuse to have you both back. But look, I'm so grateful for the time that you've given us and your generosity of insight and wisdom. For those that are as enamored by the work that you guys do and how nourishing it can be for what is the reality of a career these days, jump online. You cannot miss the Squiggly Career. It is everywhere that you can get food for the soul. Helen, Sarah, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate you coming and having a chat with us.
Thank you so much for having it.